Shout for joy to the Lord. All the land worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving, and his court with praise. Give thanks to him, and praise his name. For the Lord is good, and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations.
I grew up in a pretty large family. I had 8 sisters and 4 brothers. I came into this world on December 10th, 1854, and my parents gave me the name Isaac Lewis Brooks. Isaac is a family name. It comes from my mother's side of the family, the Weatherbys. My mother named me after her father, Isaac Weatherby, and Lewis was my father's middle name, Martin Lewis Brooks. My father was born in the territory between the Big Kanawha River and the Little Kanawha River, in Virginia, on the 16th of February, 1812. His mother died when he and his sister were young, so my father, Martin, left his home in Virginia around 1828 at the age of 16. He traveled down the Kanawha River to the Ohio River by steamboats. It was the fastest and most efficient way of travel since railroads were not plentiful and good roads were hard to build and maintain.
He lived with his half-brother, who was a captain of a steamboat on the Ohio River, going from Louisville, Kentucky to Cairo, Illinois. As father was traveling on the river, he must have heard stories from the many men and families that were traveling west.
These storytellers talked about the public land the U.S. government was selling for just $1.25 an acre, cash, just west of the Mississippi, near St. Louis. So in about 1838, my dad, Martin, rode out to the Marine settlement in Illinois with the Blankenship family in a covered wagon from St. Louis. What they found was a new settlement of beautiful rolling hills with rich, fertile soil. Here they grew grain and raised livestock. The farmland had several creeks for water and plenty of trees to build their homesteads with. This wood, it was a big asset. It helped them to construct buildings and fences. The land, it was ideal for farming and helped these settlers discover a new home. My father, Martin, picked out 3 40-acre tracts on Dex Prairie to buy, then went to the land grant office in Edwardsville and applied. He filed his application on January 28, 1840, and paid $150 in cash. The application and money were then sent to the Eastern Land Grant Office in Maryland by stagecoach. If the land had not already been bought, he would receive a certificate of ownership signed by the President of the United States. My mother, Lena Margaret Weatherby, came west from Coolville, Ohio, about the same time, in 1838 with her parents, also by steamboat and covered wagon. She was just 16 years old. Her family settled on a farm near Saline, Illinois, now known as Grant Fork. It wasn't long before Martin and Margaret met and fell in love. They got married in the home of Margaret's parents, Isaac and Elizabeth Weatherby, on February 11th, 1841. After being married less than a year, my parents had their first child, Elma Ann, or Emmy as she was known. She was born in 1841. Emmy was the first of 13 children that my parents, Martin and Margaret, would have. 2 years after she was born, they had their second daughter, Jane Lena. Having spent their first few years in Grand Fork, Illinois, Martin and Margaret, along with their 2 daughters, returned to Marine, Illinois, and rented a farm on the Marine Grand Fork Road. After nearly 4 years of waiting, the certificate came back from the General Land Office, signed by the President of the United States, John Tyler. My father was now a landowner of 120 acres in the area called Dex Prairie of Marine, Illinois.
He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove the disgrace of his people from all the earth. The Lord has spoken.
The next couple of years, my family went through some rough times. My sister Mary Elizabeth was born April 27, 1845, but had a very short life. I never even got to meet her. She died at the age of 2 years and 8 months old and was buried at the Ellison Cemetery. It wasn't but a year before, in 1846, that my mother's parents, Isaac and Elizabeth Weatherby, both died and were buried in Old Vandalia, Illinois Cemetery. Time started to get better when my mother had her 4th daughter, Naomi. She was born in the summer of 1847 and would be the first child born on this farm that my father, Martin, now owned. 2 years later, after my mother had 4 girls, she had her first baby boy. They named him Martin Davis Brooks, after my father. In 1851, my father sold the farm and bought a 120-acre farm on Marine Grand Fork Road from George Mundis for $900. George Mundis had also bought his property from the government. Father bought the property because there was plenty of timber for building, and it was on the stagecoach route from Vandalia. The prairie was covered with tall grass and trees, and there were many wild animals. Indians still passed through for hunting. Dad always slept with his hunting knife underneath his pillow. Father built a 2-story house on this property, using rocks from the nearby creeks for the foundation, and trees from the land for lumber. Over the years, this 120-acre land would be known by the neighbors as the Brooks Homestead. That same year of 1851, my mother gave birth to a 5th girl. They named her Laura Ellen. Like my sister Mary, she also had a very short life. Laura Ellen lived just over a year and died in the summer of 1852. She was buried next to her sister Mary in the Ellison Cemetery. 2 years later, my mother had her 6th girl, and they named her Suanna. Growing up, we always called her Susan.
Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee.
In the winter of 1854, my mother gave birth to me at the farm. December 10th was probably no great event, as I was the 8th child. At the time of my birth, I had 4 living sisters and 1 older brother. In my early youth, I attended the Case District School, which was 1.25 miles east of my house. At the time, Marine had no high school, but for those who wished to, they could attend classes in Marine Public School that corresponds to our high school. Many fun events took place at Case School. My sisters, brothers, and I would attend spelling bees, debates, and pie socials. While we lived on the farm, my father taught me to be a blacksmith. I did repair work on the farm equipment and shod horses. I was known by the family as the blacksmith boy. It seemed like we always had a new baby in the house. In 1856, 2 years after I was born, Mother had her third boy, Millard Fillmore. Then 2 years after that, in 1858, Mother had another girl. She named her Margaret Frances. The eighth girl, Ladaskia, was born in the fall of 1860. We gave her the nickname of Dosey. 3 years later, we have another baby sister, Louisa Emma. We like to call her Lila. Then, in the spring of 1866, the 13th and last of the children was born, my brother Donley Amos. When I was 15, my sister, Jane Lena, died February 7th, 1869. She was 26 years old. She was buried in the Mundus Cemetery because the Ellison Cemetery had been abandoned. Dad had my 2 baby sisters, who had died in infancy, exhumed from Ellison Cemetery and reburied with Jane in her grave.